Mr. Burdick, Schwab sentences that seat at 50 a.m. entering and awaiting second.
Wesley Burdick kept his own records of exactly where every dollar went. That notebook is now Exhibit A, and the reason he's being placed under federal arrest after 4 months on the run.
Being here to give a full scene outside of 11 a.m.
It would all come down to a single notebook, 70 pages of pencil entries, sketches of an Idaho cabin's view, an inventory of remaining cash, and a back cover map to a beach cafe in Costa Rica he would never see. 4 months on the run, $3.6 million in stolen casino consolidation cash. One propane delivery driver who watched a televised fugitive segment and recognized the man who answered the door. By the time federal agents finished cataloging the evidence, the armored car guard in this footage would be facing 5 federal charges, an estimated $2 million still unrecovered, and a detention hearing where the prosecutor would read his own handwritten words back to him before lunch. Quick question. When's the last time you actually watched an armored truck pull up to a bank and thought about how that whole system works? Sound off in the comments. The answer to this case is in the answer to that question. And subscribe if you haven't yet. We cover the case's mainstream news berries on a Tuesday. Wesley Thomas Burdick was born in 1986 in Belton, Missouri, a working-class suburb on the southern lip of the Kansas City metro. His father worked the line at a Ford assembly plant in Clay Como for 27 years. His mother managed the parts counter at a Napa auto store off Highway 71. They owned a 3-bedroom ranch on a street where every other driveway had a pickup truck and a small fishing boat under a tarp. Wesley was the middle of 3 boys. The oldest joined the Air Force. The youngest became a paramedic. Wesley, his high school guidance counselor would later say, was the one who never made a sound about what he wanted. He graduated from Belton High School in 2004. His yearbook photo shows a serious-faced teenager with a flat-top haircut and a polo shirt buttoned all the way up. He had played junior varsity football for 1 season, ran on the cross-country team for 2, and held no offices, joined no clubs, attended no dances anyone could remember. A teacher who taught him sophomore civics described him as, quote, attentive, polite, never volunteered an answer, but always had the right one when called on, end quote. He was not unpopular. He was, his classmates said years later when reporters came around, simply hard to remember. In the fall of 2005, 18 months out of high school and working part-time at a tire shop on Bannister Road, Burdick walked into a National Guard recruiting office in Raytown and signed an enlistment contract. He chose the Military Police Military Occupational Specialty. He did basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and advanced individual training at the same post. He returned to Kansas City as a private first class assigned to the 1138th Military Police Company, a National Guard unit headquartered on the Missouri side of the state line. Over the next 4 years, he drilled 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks every summer. He qualified as expert with the M9 service pistol 3 years running. His unit deployed once during his enlistment to a stateside support mission, and he came home with a meritorious service ribbon, a tan line where his watch had been, and almost nothing else to show for it. When his enlistment ended in 2009, Burdick took his GI Bill benefits and enrolled at Longview Community College in Lee's Summit. He completed 3 semesters of criminal justice coursework and then quietly stopped registering. A professor remembered him as the student who sat in the back row, took meticulous notes, and never spoke unless directly asked. He left with no degree, no debt, and a Missouri concealed carry permit he had earned the same year he left the Guard. For the next 8 years, he drifted through a sequence of jobs that paid in cash or by the hour. He drove a delivery truck for a beer distributor. He worked the overnight shift at a self-storage facility on Blue Parkway. He spent 14 months as a private security officer at an industrial park in North Kansas City, sitting in a small booth checking trucks against a clipboard. He earned a Class A commercial driver's license in 2014. He paid his rent on time, kept his trucks running, and accumulated a credit profile that lenders would later describe as, quote, thin but clean, end quote. In 2013, he married a woman named Holly Vanover, a dental hygienist 3 years his senior, in a small ceremony at a Methodist church in Raytown. The reception was held at the VFW Hall down the street. There were 41 guests. The marriage lasted 4 years. Holly would later tell investigators that Wesley had been kind, reliable, and almost completely unreachable. He paid every bill the day it arrived. He cooked dinner 3 nights a week. He did not raise his voice. He also, she said, would not talk about his day, his feelings, his hopes, or his money. They divorced in 2017 without lawyers, without children, and without animosity. She kept the dog. He kept the truck. In April of 2018, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Wesley Burdick walked into the dispatch office of Sentinel Cash Logistics on a frontage road off Interstate 435 and applied for a position as an armored car guard. He listed his guard service, his concealed carry permit, his Class A CDL, and his prior security work. He passed the background check. He passed the polygraph. He passed the firearms qualification. His starting wage was $21.10 an hour. His supervisor signed off on his probationary review with the words, quote, competent, punctual, follows protocol without deviation, end quote. By the fall of 2023, he had been with Sentinel for 5.5 years. He had been promoted from junior hopper to senior hopper. He was making $26.40 an hour, plus shift differentials, roughly $63,000 a year. He had recently completed the in-house certification for Vault Guard rotation, which qualified him for 3-person high-value crews. His co-workers, when later interviewed by the FBI, used a consistent vocabulary to describe him: quiet, competent, aggressively private. He was known to stand up and leave the break room when conversations turned to anyone's marriage, anyone's debts, or anyone's plans for retirement. One driver who had worked with him for 2 years said he could not name a single restaurant Burdick liked, a single team he rooted for, or a single member of his family by name. They had ridden together, that driver said, 312 times. To understand what happened on the morning of February 14th, 2024, you have to understand the system that made it possible. Armored car transport is one of the last large-scale industries in modern American commerce, in which physical cash moves through the open in volumes that would otherwise require a wire transfer and a compliance officer. On any given weekday, somewhere between $1 and $2 billion in currency moves between casinos, retail consolidators, commercial banks, and Federal Reserve cash offices in the central United States alone. It moves in sealed canvas bags inside steel-bodied trucks driven by hourly employees, making the kind of wage that would not surprise a shift manager at a hardware store. Sentinel Cash Logistics was a regional operator with a fleet of 43 armored trucks running pickup and delivery routes across Missouri, Kansas, and parts of southern Nebraska. Their contracts included 3 of the major commercial banks in Kansas City, several large retail chains with stores throughout the region, and the cash consolidation work for 2 suburban casinos operating on the Missouri side of the state line. The trucks were international chassis with armored bodies built out by a specialty manufacturer in Ohio. They weighed 18,000 pounds empty. They had reinforced glass, ballistic steel panels, and a sealed rear compartment that could only be accessed through a single door operable from inside the cab. The staffing model was a 2-person crew, a driver who stayed in the front cab and never exited the vehicle while cash was aboard, and a hopper who exited the truck to make pickups and deliveries. The driver and the hopper were trained to operate as opposed personnel. They were not friends. They were not partners. They were 2 trained employees positioned inside a sealed steel box, each one a check on the other, neither one able to compromise the load without the other's knowledge. The system was designed around that opposition. That was the whole security model. That was the only security model. On high-value routes, the company occasionally deployed a 3rd crew member as a vault guard. The casino consolidations that ran twice weekly out of the 2 Kansas City gaming facilities were high-value routes. The combined haul on a typical Wednesday morning ran between $2 and $4 million. The route ran through suburban traffic for 95 minutes from the second casino pickup to the final delivery at a commercial bank vault facility in the North Kansas City Industrial Corridor. For most of that route, the truck carried 3 people: the driver in the cab, the hopper in the rear compartment with the cash, a vault guard riding shotgun in the cab as a third set of eyes. But for one specific 90-minute segment of the run, the segment between the second casino pickup and the Consolidation Bank delivery, the segment where the truck was simply in transit on the interstate with the cargo already secured, the vault guard's role was considered redundant. On that segment, and only on that segment, Sentinel ran the route with a 2-person crew. The driver in the cab, the hopper in the back, no vault guard, no third witness, just the steel door between them and the intercom. That 90-minute window had been examined, internally, more than once. Risk assessments dating back to 2019 had flagged it as a configuration that depended entirely on the assumption that neither of the 2 remaining crew members would betray the load. The assessments noted, in language that no one had thought to translate into action, that the company's screening, training, and oversight all rested on the same foundation. The foundation was trust. The trust was placed in the hopper. Wesley Burdick had been a hopper for 4 years. The operation that ended Wesley Burdick's career as a free man was not improvised. It was not impulsive. It was not the kind of thing a quiet, competent, aggressively private armored car guard does because he snaps one morning at the wheel. It was, the FBI would later determine, planned across at least 7 months by at least 3 people, 2 of whom would be arrested in March of 2024, and 1 of whom would spend 4 months in the wind. The planning began, investigators believe, in the summer of 2023. By that point, Burdick had been certified for vault guard rotation for approximately 6 weeks. The certification had a strange consequence. It made him eligible for the 3rd seat on high-value runs, which meant his name began to appear on the rotation board for the casino consolidations. It also meant he now had detailed knowledge of the casino consolidation route, the timing, the staffing model, the single guard segment, the planned fuel stops, the dispatch protocols, the intercom procedure, every operational detail that a person on the inside of the route would know. The co-conspirators came together through means investigators have not made fully public. One of them was a Kansas City resident in his early 40s, a former retail cash handling employee with a minor criminal history, who would later be identified through DMV and rental records as the driver of the sedan that waited at the fuel station. The other, also from the Kansas City Metro, was responsible for purchasing the 2 prepaid burner phones used to coordinate the operation. The burners were activated in early January 2024. They were used exclusively for short-coded text exchanges. They were destroyed, investigators believe, on the afternoon of February 14th. The route assignment for February 14th had been visible on the dispatch board for 3 weeks. Burdick saw it the morning he came in for the previous Wednesday's run. He said nothing. He worked his shift. He went home to his rented duplex. He returned the following Monday and made small adjustments to his locker, clearing personal items, swapping out a worn pair of boots, replacing a duffel bag with a lighter one. None of it triggered an alarm. None of it would have, in retrospect, looked like anything other than ordinary maintenance. On the morning of Wednesday, February 14th, 2024, Burdick clocked in at the Sentinel Depot at 4:47 a.m. His scheduled shift began at 5. He drank a cup of coffee in the break room. He spoke briefly to the dispatcher about the weather. He checked out his service pistol and his vest from the armory cage. He climbed into the passenger seat of Armored Truck Unit 41 alongside the assigned driver, a 31-year-old 4-year Sentinel employee whose name has not been released because he is a cooperating witness. They departed the depot at 5:08. The first pickup, at the larger of the 2 casinos, was completed at 5:53 a.m. The combined Tuesday night gaming proceeds, paper currency, primarily in $50 and $100 denominations, banded into $10,000 straps and packed into sealed canvas bags, totaled $1,872,000. The bags were loaded into the rear compartment by Burdick. He signed the receipt. He sealed the door. He took his seat on the bench in the rear compartment, and the truck departed at 6:06. The second pickup, at the smaller casino 12 miles south, was completed at 7:41 a.m. after a delay caused by an internal recount at the casino's cage. The Tuesday night proceeds there totaled $1,739,400. Combined, the load aboard Truck 41, as it pulled out of the second casino's loading dock at 7:58 a.m., was $3,611,400 in unmarked United States currency. At 8:04 a.m., Truck 41 entered Interstate 49 northbound, bound for the Consolidation Bank vault facility in North Kansas City. The vault guard's seat was empty. The truck was running the single guard transit segment. The driver was in the cab. Burdick was in the back. Between them, the sealed steel door and the intercom. At 9:31 a.m., the truck exited the interstate at the planned fuel stop, a Phillips 66 station on a frontage road in a commercial strip between two industrial parks. The driver pulled the truck up to the diesel pump. He completed the fuel transaction at the pedestal. At 9:43 a.m., still seated in the cab and running through his post-fuel paperwork, the driver received an intercom call from the rear compartment. Burdick's voice, the driver later testified, was completely normal. He said there was a problem with one of the cash bags from the second pickup. The seal looked compromised. He wanted to verify the bag's contents. He was going to step out of the rear compartment for 30 seconds to retrieve a spare seal kit from the side compartment. Protocol required the driver to acknowledge and to remain in the cab. The driver acknowledged. He remained in the cab. At 9:47 a.m., a four-door sedan that had been parked at the far end of the station's lot for approximately 12 minutes pulled forward to a position roughly 20 feet from the rear of the armored truck. Burdick exited the rear compartment, carrying what surveillance footage would later show appeared to be a routine cargo bag, the kind of zippered canvas duffel a guard might use to carry a spare seal kit, a logbook, and his lunch. He walked at a measured pace across the asphalt. He did not look at the camera. He did not look at the cab. He opened the rear passenger door of the sedan. He got in. The sedan pulled out of the lot at 9:48 a.m. and turned westbound onto the frontage road. The duffel bag contained, investigators later determined, approximately $3,611,400 in banded United States currency. Burdick had transferred the contents of the casino consolidation load into the duffel during the 23 minutes between the second pickup and the fuel stop. He had used the spare seal kit stored in the rear compartment to reseal the original canvas bags with replacement tags he had quietly removed from a supply drawer at the depot the previous week. The original bags, now containing only crumpled newspaper weighted with a roll of duct tape, were still on the bench seat in the rear compartment when the driver finally opened the door. The driver finished his post-fuel paperwork at 10:01 a.m. He tried the intercom at 10:04 a.m. and received no response. He tried again at 10:06. He tried a third time at 10:08. At 10:11 a.m., he exited the cab, walked around to the rear of the truck, and used his override key to open the door. The rear compartment was empty. The bags were on the bench. The seal kit was open on the floor. Burdick was gone. This is the case where the catalyst is the suspect himself. There was no overdose to investigate, no whistleblower to call a hotline, no audit that found a discrepancy on a Tuesday afternoon. There was a man who walked out of an armored truck on a February morning and did not stop walking for 128 days. The driver of Truck 41 called Sentinel Dispatch at 10:19 a.m. The call was routed to the operations manager within 90 seconds. The operations manager called the Consolidation Bank's vault facility to confirm the missed delivery. He called Sentinel's corporate security officer. He called the Grandview Police Department. He called the FBI Kansas City field office. The total elapsed time between Burdick stepping out of the armored truck and the first federal phone ringing was 44 minutes. The FBI assumed jurisdiction by 12:15 p.m. Within 4 hours, agents had pulled the Phillips 66 surveillance footage, identified the sedan as a maroon late-model Chevrolet Malibu, run the partial license plate through the Kansas Department of Revenue, and matched it to a vehicle rented 3 days earlier from a budget airport rental counter under the name of a Kansas City resident with no obvious connection to Burdick. The connection would emerge later through the burner phones. Burdick himself had vanished. He had not gone home. The Grandview duplex was searched within hours and was found to contain the things a methodical man leaves behind when he does not intend to return. 2 changes of work clothes still hanging in the closet, a coffee maker with a fresh filter, a frozen dinner in the freezer, a houseplant on the kitchen sill that had been watered the morning before. There was no laptop. There were no firearms. Investigators noted that Burdick's personal sidearm, a 9mm pistol he had purchased at a gun show in 2019, was not present. There was no passport. There were no significant amounts of cash, no bank statements, no notebooks, no recent receipts. The duplex had been quietly stripped of anything personal weeks before the heist. For the next 4 months, Burdick was a ghost. He surfaced briefly in Lawrence, Kansas, where investigators would later determine he rented a storage unit under a false name and parked approximately $214,000 in cash inside it before continuing west. He surfaced in north-central Wyoming, where surveillance footage from a discount sporting goods store showed a man matching his build, purchasing camping equipment, freeze-dried food, propane tanks, and a heavy winter coat. He surfaced in southern Montana, where a gas station camera caught a man at a fuel pump wearing a baseball cap pulled low over what could have been his face. After Montana, the trail went cold. What Burdick was actually doing for those 4 months would not be known until December. He was sitting in a rented cabin in rural Idaho, a 1-room timber cabin off a Forest Service road in the Panhandle, rented through a local management company under the name on his forged Wyoming driver's license. He was paying his rent in cash through a drop box at the management office in town. He was buying groceries every 12 days at a market 31 miles away. He would later write in pencil in a 70-page composition book, quote, "waiting for the noise to die down," end quote. In the meantime, the money had begun to move. Investigators following the financial trail would document at least $1,400,000 routed through a sequence of 3 bank accounts opened in 2 foreign jurisdictions, first Belize, then Panama, then a correspondent banking network that took the trail offshore and out of practical reach. The wire transfers were executed not by Burdick himself, but by the second co-conspirator, the burner phone purchaser, who had been provided with account access by a 4th-party investigators have referred to in court filings only as, quote, "an associate in the financial services industry," end quote. That associate has not been publicly identified. The parallel investigation was running the entire time Burdick was running. While he sat in his Idaho cabin, sketching the view out his single front window and tallying the cash in his duffel bag, a multi-agency task force was reconstructing the operation around him with the patience of people who knew the math was on their side. The first major break came in mid-March. Cellular forensics traced the 2 burner phones to a single retail purchase at a discount electronics chain in Independence, Missouri, on January 9th. The transaction had been paid in cash. The store's surveillance footage, retained on a 30-day rolling buffer, had been pulled by FBI agents on day 29. The footage showed a man in a hooded sweatshirt and dark jeans purchasing the 2 devices and a 5-pack of refill cards. His face was partially obscured. His left hand was not. A distinctive ring on his 4th finger, a heavy silver band with an engraved pattern, matched a ring worn in a 2019 booking photo from a Kansas City misdemeanor arrest. The arrest had been a minor narcotics charge. The defendant had been the second co-conspirator. He was arrested at his apartment in Raytown on March 19th. The second break came 8 days later. The Malibu, the maroon sedan from the Phillips 66 surveillance footage, was located in a long-term storage lot at the Kansas City airport. The rental had been extended once, then abandoned. Inside the vehicle, agents recovered partial fingerprints from the steering wheel, the rear passenger door handle, and the glove box. The prints matched a 42-year-old Kansas City man with a prior conviction for retail theft and a history of cash handling work at a chain grocery distribution center. He was arrested at his mother's house in Independence on March 27th. Neither co-conspirator immediately cooperated. Both were charged separately and both retained counsel. But the financial flow analysis was already in motion. The Belize accounts had been opened in January under the name of a shell entity. The Panama accounts had been opened in February. The correspondent banking trail led, in 2 of 3 cases, back through wire transfers initiated by the Raytown co-conspirator from a Kansas City credit union account in his own name. He had been careful, but not careful enough. The wires were traced. The accounts were frozen. Approximately $1,400,000 was identified in the offshore system. Of that, only fragments would ever be recovered. Meanwhile, the storage unit in Lawrence, Kansas, was located on March 31st. It had been rented under a false name with a forged Kansas driver's license that matched the photograph on Burdick's later recovered Wyoming forgery. The unit contained 2 duffel bags. Inside the bags, $214,000 in banded United States currency, matching the strap dates and Federal Reserve sequence ranges of the casino consolidation load. Forensic technicians processed the bags. 3 latent prints were recovered from the inner zipper of the second bag. All 3 matched Wesley Thomas Burdick. The FBI Kansas City field office, working in coordination with the U.S. Marshals Service, began running Burdick's photograph through every available channel. His face was added to the National Fugitive Watch program in late April. A 2-minute segment ran on a syndicated true crime program in early November. The segment showed his Sentinel employment photo, his Missouri concealed carry permit photo, and a recent surveillance still from the Wyoming sporting goods store. It aired in 141 markets, including Boise, Spokane, and Coeur d'Alene. We're heading into the courtroom soon. Before we get there, if you've made it this far, you already know this channel does these stories differently. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next segment is the part the news ran for 30 seconds and forgot about by Friday. We don't forget. 4 months and 11 days after Wesley Burdick walked out of Armored Truck Unit 41 at a fuel stop off Interstate 49, a propane delivery driver named Curtis Hagan pulled his tank truck up to a 1-room cabin off a Forest Service road in Boundary County, Idaho. He was there to fill the cabin's exterior propane tank. He had watched the syndicated true crime program 3 nights earlier on a Sunday evening in his living room in Bonners Ferry. He had not thought about it again until the man who answered the cabin door on a December afternoon and signed for the delivery looked up at him, briefly, and then looked away. Curtis Hagan finished the propane delivery. He climbed back into his truck. He drove 3 miles down the Forest Service road. He pulled over onto a logging spur. He called the local sheriff's office and asked, in language he would later say felt absurd as he spoke it, whether they could pass a message to the FBI about a man he was almost certain was a federal fugitive. The sheriff's office called the FBI Coeur d'Alene resident agency. The agency called the Kansas City field office. The Kansas City field office reviewed Hagan's description, ran a delivery records query through the propane company, and confirmed that the cabin had been rented under a name matching the forged Wyoming license they had been looking for. A surveillance team was on the ground within 19 hours. The arrest warrant had been signed in June. Federal agents approached the cabin at 6:40 a.m. on a Tuesday in late December. The temperature was 11 degrees Fahrenheit. There was 4 inches of fresh snow on the ground. The cabin sat at the end of a quarter-mile driveway with a single propane tank, a small woodshed, and a 15-year-old pickup truck parked under a tarp. The team consisted of 6 FBI agents, 2 U.S. Marshals, and 2 Boundary County Sheriff's deputies as local liaisons. They approached the cabin in tactical formation with weapons drawn. Wesley Burdick was inside. He was sitting in a wooden chair at a small kitchen table. He was wearing thermal underwear, jeans, and wool socks. He was drinking instant coffee from an enamel cup. The composition book was open on the table in front of him. He was, according to the lead agent's later testimony, in the middle of writing an entry when the announcement came through the door. The entry began with 3 words. The agent did not read the rest before securing the room. The arrest itself took less than 90 seconds. Burdick did not resist. He did not flee. He set the pencil down on the table, raised both hands to shoulder level, and stood up slowly when instructed. He was placed in handcuffs at the kitchen table. He was walked out of the cabin in his wool socks, with agents carrying his boots behind him to the transport vehicle. The lead agent, a senior special agent from the Kansas City field office who had been assigned to the case since the afternoon of February 14th, identified himself and asked Burdick to confirm his name. Burdick looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, quote, "You already know my name. You wouldn't be here if you didn't," end quote. He was advised of his Miranda rights. He acknowledged he understood. He did not speak again, except to ask for water, until he was processed at the federal facility in Spokane the following day. A search of the cabin yielded the following items: a duffel bag containing $34,000 in cash, predominantly in $20 and $50 denominations, a forged Wyoming driver's license in a name that has not been released, a 9mm semi-automatic handgun loaded with a full magazine, stored in a kitchen drawer beneath a folded dish towel, a box of 19 rounds of ammunition, a propane camping stove, a 2-burner Coleman lantern, a wool blanket, 3 changes of clothing, a small library of paperback westerns, and the composition book. The composition book was the smoking gun. Wesley Thomas Burdick was indicted by a federal grand jury in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Missouri on June 17, 2024, 6 months before he was actually in custody. The indictment had been sealed pending his apprehension. It was unsealed on the afternoon of his arrest. It contained 5 separate federal counts. The charges were as follows: 1 count of 18 U.S.C. Parv 2113A, bank robbery, applied under the federal jurisdictional reach over armored car robberies tied to federally insured institutions. 1 count of 18 U.S.C. Parv 2114, assault and robbery of mail, money, or property of the United States, applied here under the Armored Car Protective Umbrella interpretation. Multiple counts of 18 U.S.C. Parv 1956, money laundering, tied to the wire transfers through Belize and Panama. 1 count of 18 U.S.C. Parv of 1073, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and, added at the time of arrest based on the recovered handgun and the underlying federal felony predicate, 1 count of 18 U.S.C. Barkphase 922G, felon in possession of a firearm. Burdick was transported from Spokane to Kansas City for his initial appearance. He was represented at arraignment by a federal public defender. He pleaded not guilty to all counts. The government moved for pretrial detention. The detention hearing was held 3 days after Christmas in a federal courtroom in downtown Kansas City. The prosecutor was an assistant United States attorney named Marin Locke, a 14-year veteran of the office who had handled the original indictment in June. She presented the government's case for detention in a 34-minute argument that the local press would describe the next morning as, quote, methodical, end quote. She walked the court through the evidence: the surveillance footage from the Phillips 66, the fingerprints on the Lawrence storage unit duffels, the cellular forensics on the burner phones, the financial trail through Belize and Panama, the 4-month flight, the forged Wyoming license, the handgun in the kitchen drawer. And then she introduced the composition book. The composition book had been entered into evidence the previous afternoon. It was a 70-page college-ruled notebook filled in pencil with Wesley Burdick's account of his 4 months in Idaho. The early entries were short and operational: the cabin's heating bill, the drive to the grocery store, the cost of propane, the wind. The middle entries lengthened. He described the view out his single front window, the lodgepole pines, the change of the leaves, the snow when it came in October. He sketched the view, in pencil, on 3 separate pages. He sketched the cabin's interior. He sketched on one page what investigators believe was the layout of a beach cafe. The later entries became, in the prosecutor's word at the hearing, financial. There was a partial accounting, written in Burdick's small, careful hand, of the $3,611,400. The accounting was broken into 4 categories: his share, the co-conspirators' shares, operational costs, and, underlined twice, a category labeled simply, quote, buffer, end quote. The buffer entry was followed by a number. Investigators interpreted it as the anticipated expense for bribery and forged document services in connection with a planned eventual relocation abroad. The prosecutor read the buffer entry aloud in court. The number was $475,000. The courtroom was silent. The back cover of the composition book contained one additional element: a hand-drawn map. The map was not labeled with a city. It showed a coastline, a road approaching from inland, a small building marked with the word cafe, a beach, and a small X at a point in the sand. Above the X, in pencil, were 3 words: Costa Rica, April. Beneath the X, a time, 11 a.m. The government argued that the notebook established 3 things beyond reasonable dispute: that Wesley Burdick had committed the underlying offense, that he had retained significant resources unaccounted for in the recovered cash, and that he had, at the time of his arrest, an active and detailed plan to flee the jurisdiction of the United States in the spring. The government argued he was, by any standard the court might apply, a flight risk in the most literal sense the word permits. The magistrate judge took a recess of approximately 21 minutes. He returned. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. He noted the strength of the government's evidence, the defendant's demonstrated capacity for sustained flight, the existence of unrecovered funds, the forged identification, the firearm, and the documented intent to depart the country. He denied bond. He ordered Burdick remanded to federal custody pending trial. The hearing concluded at 11:41 a.m., before the lunch hour the prosecutor had anticipated. Wesley Burdick is currently held without bond at a federal detention facility in the Western District of Missouri. His trial is pending. The 2 co-conspirators arrested in March of 2024 are awaiting separate trials and have not entered cooperating witness agreements as of the date of this recording. Of the $3,611,400 taken from Armored Truck Unit 41 on the morning of February 14th, $214,000 has been recovered from the Lawrence Storage Unit, $34,000 from the Idaho cabin, and approximately $1,400,000 has been traced into offshore accounts, of which a small fraction has been clawed back through international cooperation. The remainder, somewhere between $1,900,000 and $2 million, remains, as of this recording, unrecovered. Sentinel Cash Logistics has revised its high-value route protocols. The casino consolidation routes are now staffed at 3-person crews for the entire transit, including the previously single-guard segment between the second pickup and the consolidation bank. The driver of Armored Truck Unit 41 returned to work in May of 2024 in an administrative position. He has not ridden a route since. The propane delivery driver, Curtis Hagan, received a portion of the recovered funds as a reward through the FBI's Fugitive Recovery Program. He has declined every interview request and continues to deliver propane in Boundary County, Idaho. The composition book remains in federal custody as evidence. The hand-drawn map of the Costa Rica Beach Cafe is sealed inside it, between page 70 and the back cover, untouched. Since the December afternoon, a federal agent picked it up off a kitchen table 11 degrees above zero in the Idaho Panhandle. That case was something else. But the one on your screen right now, wait until you hear what this one did and where they finally found him. Click it now.